the answer key from last time. We're going to start our new notes here. So, again, the word bank shouldn't be giving us, it's not giving us all the answers. It's just helping us to remember the vocab words in case you might forget. What was that from the S list? So knowing that you guys can use this list. So I'll have it printed for you guys so you can have it kind of next to your test as you go. This is our word bank. All right, so we're talking about what's going to be on our test. And again, the vocab chart you guys made last class, although it's obviously would be helpful to be able to use that on the test, that's the things you guys need to know. So you don't get to use that on the test, but you can use that to study for the test, and hopefully those vocab words are becoming more comfortable for you. So those of you guys taking it here in person, we'll just do a normal test like we typically would. Those online have to do basically a little bit more hoops to jump through to remind. For me to kind of watch them as they test. So everyone should be good to go here, hopefully. So in 2-1, we talked about the different patterns that showed up in our, in different, like using examples to kind of come up with a pattern and make your prediction. So they asked for the area of the grids. I don't know if you read that. So like in the first one, the area would be 1. The second one would be 5 because there's 5 little squares there. The next one would be 9. The one after that would be 13. So it says if the pattern continues, what would be the area of the 7th grid or the 8th grid? Like what would happen? That pattern continuing. So talking about those patterns. What you guys get for that? What would that pattern be? Again, we're using here inductive reasoning, which is using patterns or observations. So you want to know the 7th and the 8th. What'd you guys get? 7th, what'd you guys get? Anyone? Well, what'd you get?
17.
17? I think that would be the 5th one, would be 17. We're looking for the 7th and the 8th. Yeah, go ahead.
25.
The 7th would be 25. The 8th would be 29, yeah. So every time we're adding what, Lena? 4. Every time we're adding 4 to the pattern that we had before. Now this would be a tough one to come up with, like the 200th pattern. The rule here is a little bit tougher, so it would be a tougher one to kind of keep going on unless you just keep adding 4 and have to keep track of that. So this is one, just kind of following that pattern through. Now, one of the things that I can ask you guys to do is showing something's false by giving a counterexample. So that's one example that shows it doesn't work. So it says all intersecting lines form right angles. So you have to draw an example of anytime 2 intersecting lines maybe don't always form right angles. Same thing for the next one. You have to think of some numbers that would work for this. Any volunteers to come up? Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to do one of them. You can't just say it's true. Well, you could say it's true, but I'll tell you both of these are false. So hopefully Lena will draw us one that they don't cross at 90 degrees. Yeah, so those two could be equal. Those two are equal to each other. Maybe there's something other than 90. Maybe these are both 120. So I want you to maybe show me that there's something other than that predicted of they don't form right angles. They're not 90 degrees. The value of x to the third is always greater than x. Did you think of an example where that doesn't work? Yeah.
Negative 2 times equals -8, and x just equals -2.
Yeah, so Luke used -2 as an example. So I think any negative number, this would work, almost any, not -1, would be equal. But x to the third would be -2 to the third, which is, like he said, -2 multiplied 3 times, which would be -8. But it's saying that this is always greater than that. -8 is not greater than -2. So using a negative number is a way to show that. So sometimes you just have to think a little bit. There might be something on a test that maybe you have to like leave it for a second, come back and say, I can't think of anything right now. And then the big thing with the numbered ones, I would usually suggest trying a positive, a negative, and then 0. See if any of those, maybe trying a fraction, trying some different values that might work. Because I actually think a fraction would also do this. If I use 1/2. 1/2 to the third power. When I multiply that, that's going to be 1/8, and that's actually smaller than a half, so a fraction also does the same thing. So just kind of watching for kind of different types of numbers to try for something like those. All right, so that was our inductive reasoning. Then we get into conditional statements. Those are like the if-then statements. That's when we watch the video on if it has a tail, it's a monkey. So the if-then statements, conditional statements. So conditional is an if-then statement. So a ram is a mammal, so we want to write that as an if-then statement. So that's like if P, then Q. So if something, then this happens. So a ram is a mammal. So it's saying if it's a ram, then what? It's a mammal, yeah. Now, I'm not going to expect you guys to be like mammal experts, so I'm not going to ask you some really tough question like, ooh, how about a dolphin or a dragon or a seahorse? Like something that's some bizarre animal. I'm not expecting you guys to be like biologists here. So it's going to be straightforward. I'm not going to expect you to tell me yes or no, is this true? Hopefully you know that is true. Rams are mammals, but if not, it's going to be okay. It's going to be something that's like common knowledge that you can work with. Now we're going to write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive for this. So we're going to do each of these for this statement. Now, these are probably the ones that you guys can get mixed up most frequently, but also on the test, understand that if I'm asking you to do the converse, inverse, and contrapositive, I'm asking you to do that for the original statement. So keep going back to the original statement each time and changing that. Don't take this one and then change it for the inverse. So you're always going back to the original statement. And so these would be ones you're going to want to study, knowing the difference between them, because I'll ask you to do them. And you have to know what the differences are. So you're going to have to just be able to write a problem like this. And like I said, it was one of those that I had students do poorly on the test just because they didn't read the directions or they didn't follow what I'd asked them to do. Then on the test, I'm going to ask you guys, is it true or false? And then if it's false, I'll have you give a counter example. So on one like this, you wouldn't need to, but you definitely could. So converse is when we switch the if-then parts. And I'm just going to shorten it a lot. This isn't really a sentence. It should be if it is a mammal, then it is a ram. I'm okay if you shorten it up a little bit. But you get the idea. If a mammal, then a ram. Now this would be an example of one I could say false. Because we're actually mammals. and probably argue that we're not Rams. Unless you want to talk about our, I know that's our mascot, but I don't identify as a ram necessarily as a person. So mammals don't have to be rams. I have mammals that live in my house that are not rams. All right, inverse is the one where you add the not to it. But again, you go back to the original statement. So if it is not a ram, then it is not a mammal. Again, we're not changing anything about this statement other than adding those nots to it. And again, you're going back to the original statement. Each time going back to that. And then finally, contrapositive takes the two together. So if it is not a mammal, then it is not a ram. This next one's almost identical to a test question we're gonna have. And like I said, I think I mentioned this before when we talked about biconditional statements. This was the most often missed question on this chapter 2 test every year that I teach this. And again, I don't know if it's just that I don't stress enough that it's gonna be a question on the test and we need to do it, or it's just something that you're like, it's one question, it's not a big of a deal. Definitely want to know how to write a biconditional statement. So it says, write the converse. If both the original and the converse are true, then we can write a biconditional. So the converse is when I flip the if-then part. So I'm going to do that first. So if circles have the same circumference, then they have the same diameter. Oops. Now we have not talked about circles yet. So you are not circle experts. So you might not know this, but this is true. So circumference is the distance around a circle. If I tell you the diameter, if I have two circles that have the same diameter, like thinking about a type of pizza, if you go to a pizza place and you say I'm ordering a 12-inch pizza, they're talking about the diameter. The circumference is going to be the same of both pizzas. Like if you and your brother both order the 12-inch pizza, you're going to have the same size pizza. So that's a true statement. Again, that might not be something you're familiar with quite yet because we haven't talked much about circles, but hopefully that makes sense. Since these are both true, then we can write a biconditional. A biconditional takes the if-then out of it. So it takes the hypothesis and the conclusion and puts if and only if in the middle. So again, take the if-then out of there. So this is the biconditional. So we rewrite that statement, and now it's called a biconditional statement. There's not an if-then, it's just in the middle we write if and only if. That makes sense. Again, it's not a huge point value on the test, but to get that one question wrong, it's kind of a hard one for me to give partial credit for, because typically either you know what I'm talking about or you've got zero clue. So you will have to do this somewhere on the test. So I'm just trying to be as transparent as I can and let you guys know that that's going to be the case. All right, so we're ready to flip to the backside, but maybe we should take a break. All right, why don't we, I'm gonna pause the video. We're gonna just go outside for a little bit.